thank you for joining in on this session on a small keynote on the Metaverse, where I will try and zoom in on how the Metaverse will affect the music industry and what implications it has. So yeah, I'm from the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and I will shortly talk a little bit about what the institute is. Hi.
Sorry, please.
Do you want to say anything? No? Okay, good. Perfect. So yeah, so I have 20 minutes, and please ask questions if you have any, but obviously it's not that long. So I'll try to run quickly through this. So, oh, there you go. Oh, sorry about this. I just have to figure out where I'm pointing. Sorry, because it actually has a little video in it, right? And have you seen this video before? Do you know what it is? It's from Megan Thee Stallion's Hotiverse. And I think that's really interesting. So she's been doing some concerts in virtual reality in cinemas where you get the VR headsets on, and then you can just get really close to her vibe, you know, and she has a very hot vibe, so that's why it's called the Hotiverse. Have anybody experienced it? Because I had, yeah? Was it good?
Yeah, it was better than you would imagine.
It's really interesting to see, you know, how can this actually be used in different ways. So that's kind of one way that we're moving towards the Metaverse. So just a quick intro of where I'm from. This is a picture of two old white men, and that's actually where we come from. Over 50 years ago, the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies was made by Thorkild Christensen, who was a former OECD Secretary General, in order to try and figure out how can we overcome this short-termism, like thinking only in short terms and thinking what will happen in 1 or 2 or 3 years in our strategy, but also thinking how can we actually be ready for the next 10, 15, 20 years and see how the development is going. So that's what we're working on at the Institute. Then I have the pleasure of looking into media only and the media industry, communication, how we communicate, outreach, how is this going to affect our lives. So I have a background in media science. I'm a member of the Danish Media Board, and I've been working in the media industry for a long time in the Danish broadcasting, and also doing a lot of conferences on new media and where we're heading. So I've been in this field for a long time. So really important thing here, I don't know if you know any futurists like me, but we do not predict the future and we do not try to predict the future. But what we try to do is to look into these patterns and see all these different trends that are happening now, how they will affect our lives. And this is something that we really take big pride in seeing, okay, so how will this actually turn out on a longer run? But today I'm not talking so much about futurism and our methods and scenario work or anything. I'm going to talk about the Metaverse because we really feel at the Institute that this is something that's going to affect our lives in a huge way, the development. So what is it? So the Metaverse is a seamless convergence of our physical and virtual lives with these overlapping realities. And I think that's very important to look into our whole perception of reality, because is the physical reality more real or more valued than the virtual reality? I think we're heading towards a future where we're going to learn that the virtual reality actually has the same kind of value, or even for some people more value, which we see in the young audiences that are working with this. And as you can see, it's not just about, these virtual worlds, like people are asking, is it just another Second Life or something like that? It's much more than that. It's these kind of overlapping sort of ways that we go in with augmented reality, with holograms, with all these kinds of things that can affect all things during our daily lives, and of course also entertainment and the music industry. And also, as you see here, the Notorious B.I.G., his NFT, which is interesting because it's a cassette, so you're sort of taking the old and putting it into the new, and I really find that interesting, and taking a lot of old material and also putting it on the chain, and then suddenly you can gain new value from this, make new engagement, and have this new kind of ecosystem that we're working with. So this is really interesting. So it's much more than just a virtual world or just an NFT. It's kind of the direction that this is taking. This is an interesting McKinsey report. There are a lot of reports coming out right now, and I would definitely recommend you to read them. This is the newest one from McKinsey that says by 2030, it's entirely plausible that more than 50% of live events could be held in the Metaverse. That's kind of a crazy statement. We try not to do these sort of predictions at the Institute, but it's interesting to see what other people are finding when they're doing this. And actually, we're doing something called the Delphi Study on some of these assumptions. at the Institute, where we're trying to reach out to a lot of different experts and figuring out if there's some kind of consensus about all these numbers and all these, dates and times that are being thrown out. So that will come later. But also, the average internet user might spend up to 6 hours a day in the metaverse experiences in 2030. That's another one from McKinsey, which is really interesting because it's all about the attention, right? It's all about how you get the eyeballs and how you navigate in this more and more complex media landscape that we live in. And also, the metaverse has a potential to generate up to $5 trillion of value in 2030. So it's really a lot of money there. And obviously, the metaverse, since as I started out with, it's not just one thing, it's a lot of things. And nobody really knows, what it's going to become and how all this is going to be implemented and what impact it will have. But there's a lot of money being invested in it, and there's a lot of interest in it, both from user side and from investor side. So I think that's why, obviously, it's interesting to look into and seeing what value can this actually create, apart from, obviously, money, but also what value for the users, and how can we make this something that people can access, that people will use, and that can create value in people's lives. So just 5 quick myths about the metaverse in our sense, at least. You might not agree on this, but one company will build the metaverse. Obviously not, even though that Meta has been really good in trying to sort of manifest their position in the field. Not one company will build this. This will be a lot of different things moving towards this direction. And again, the metaverse is just a new second life? No. So even though we obviously have all these worlds, Decentraland, Sandbox, Roblox, Fortnite, they're just part of the whole movement towards this more virtual sort of way of engaging and interacting. The metaverse is dystopian or utopian. I think we're going to see a mix of all these things. I hope we're not going to go into the Ready Player One kind of, where the world is a dystopian world and we jump into our VR headsets and our haptic suits and then we live our lives in the virtual world. This is not going to happen, not at least in the way that we think of it. So we have to get away from the whole either utopian or dystopian way of looking at it. Also, the metaverse is the same as Web3. It is not, but it is very closely related. But in our scenarios that I will tell you about later, we have been in some scenarios at the Institute. We look into some of these big uncertainties. And one of those uncertainties is whether it will be open and sort of Web3 based, or it will be proprietary and owned by companies in the kind of good old Web2 way. Because it's definitely not certain that the metaverse is going to be built on Web3 structures. It's very plausible, it's a possible future, but it's not the only future. And also the metaverse is already here. We had a discussion at the car, actually. I think a lot of people, is the metaverse, how many think the metaverse is here in here? Great, all right. At least 1.5, maybe 2, 3, 4. But it's really interesting. In our sense, we don't see the metaverse is here yet. We're moving towards the metaverse because in order to be the metaverse, it has to be more accessible. We have to see a little bit, at least, more interoperability, possibilities to take these new things and move them around. The technology has to be more mature. We have to see more people using it. It has to be more scalable. So this is like it's a long way to go. I think this is really interesting in looking the direction it's taking, and maybe I don't know if you can read it, so I'll just read it out loud. So this is Adam Mosseri, who's a head of Instagram, so one of the Web2 kind of social media companies. He says in an article that was from The Verge, interesting read as well, story from Wired, there's a fundamental tension between a centralized platform like ours and a decentralized technologies like blockchain. But the world is changing. The greatest risk a platform faces is not competition, though competition is a huge risk, obviously. It is that the world changes to make what you do irrelevant because you're not willing to lean in and change along with the world. And I think this is really clever. He's opening up for Instagram being more Web3 based and giving more power back to the users in 5 years. I think that's a very brave way to do it. And I think this is something that we're going to look into that might change the way and the structures that we have. So here are just a few examples on how we sort of see that the industry is moving towards the metaverse. So first of all, this whole idea of building land and entertaining and owning these spaces is super interesting. You might have heard some of these plots of lands being sold, like Snoop Dogg, You can buy, something next to him, super cool in Decentraland. And then suddenly Yuga Labs, that have created the Bored Ape, they create their own world, and then that's the new thing, you should buy land here. And it's kind of a little bit of a risky business right now. We see it a little bit as a Betamax, what's it called, the VHS recorder, right? Because which one will win, and will a plot in Decentraland be anything worth in a couple of years? But it's interesting to see it because you can actually own, you can own the rights there. You have a whole new sort of area that you can, and an arena that you can actually have a lot of interesting interactions with the audience. Like there's some big stadiums being built, around the world as well for football, for instance, where you can sort of, Manchester City is building a virtual stadium where suddenly they can get audiences from around the world that are not normally being possible to access because it's very expensive to go to the stadium and watch a football game. Suddenly you can come in a virtual world, so they can own that. And I think that's really interesting, but of course build with caution right now, even though there are some really interesting experiences that you can have in there. Also, this is a little video with music on, maybe, where you can see how adding visuals to live events is something that we're going to see much more of. I think we need a little bit of music, right? I don't know how loud it could go. I don't know if you've seen this before, but it's a Live Nation's version in collaboration with Snapchat, and how they're thinking of adding on these new visual layers, both when you're there live, at the concert, but also, taking it home and having an extra experience back home, and taking your badges, taking all that you've experienced and showcase it, and use it in other ways of interaction. So I found that super interesting, and also as in the video that you saw in the beginning, right, with the augmented reality layers on top of our physical worlds. I really think that this is where the real change is going to affect our lives, and could be interesting also to look into as a music industry. Also, of course, NFTs. I know you've already been talking about them, and I guess we're going to talk about them for the next 2 days a lot, because the non-fungible tokens are really interesting to see how they might change the way of ownership, the way of interaction, the way of co-creation, and the whole way of commitment and giving utility and engagement. So could this be the new decentralized Spotify? How many do you think that Spotify will win in the way that they are right now? I mean, it's interesting. They already said that they're no longer a music company. I don't know, are there any Spotify people here? Nope. So how, they already changed themselves from being a music company to being a creator economy. So company, we're no longer that. So it's super interesting to see whether they will also, move more into this whole Web3 ownership NFT way of having things. Another thing that's really interesting that I really look a lot into is the whole DAO movement, the decentralized autonomous organizations, the organizations that have, they have a goal, they have a common sort of thing that they work on. And it can really support both artists, but also projects. And it also has a lot of power. I know there was a DAO trying to buy Blockbuster. They didn't manage, but it's really interesting to go together and actually create something. There is I don't know that many DAOs in the music industry yet, but for instance, in the cinematic field, in film, there is something called Kino DAO. And there you can actually, by being part of this DAO, you can get access to the red carpet experiences. You can be part of co-creating a manuscript. So that's really interesting. Be part of these things that are being created. So this whole way of interaction and being part of things, I think, is going to change the relationship between the users and the musicians or the creators, right? Also, this is something that I really find interesting to look into, the whole synthetic media. So when content is computer generated. So this is an Asian band called Eternity. So they're a virtual girl group created using AI technology. And obviously there are a lot of humans being involved in here, but this whole idea of having synthetic musicians. We see a lot of synthetic influencers that have a really large crowd on, for instance, Instagram. I don't know if you know Michaela. She has like 3 million followers, and it's really interesting. She has a physical boyfriend, like a human boyfriend, and they broke up, and it was a huge thing, and it's kind of, it's really interesting, right? So when they start making music and start creating like this, so it's both synthetic musicians and synthetic music, all AI generated. So I wrote an article half a year ago that was a bit discussed in the futurist industry. It had its own Reddit thread with people discussing it. Because what if 99% of the metaverse is made by AI? Like, what if this continues, So the creation is being made and generated by AI, or at least using AI. And it's not really that far-fetched, I would say. Because when you look at what we can already, if you know OpenAI, for instance, GPT-3, DALL-E 2, a lot of technologies that are actually helping you create things by just writing in, a few words. This is the first edition of DALL-E over there. So this is an Nina Simone song that he's typing in, and then it's creating the pictures at the same time. So he's actually generating a music video, using a tool that normally would take an artist to sort of create, right? And it's really, and this is just the DALL-E 1 version. DALL-E 2 is much better, and you should definitely go check it out if you haven't seen it before. Because the stuff you can do there is amazing, and it's really empowering everybody to create, and everybody to create both pictures but also music. So this over here is Kurt Cobain, and there was made it was not himself, but somebody else used his voice and the whole atmosphere of the Nirvana music and created a new song. So who has the right to do that? And is that better or not? How many deceased artists are we going to look into having, AI-generated music? And what will the role then be of new musicians coming in if we have all these legacy musicians suddenly doing new numbers, How will that actually look? Another interesting app that I found while doing a little bit of research for this presentation, right, is Boomy. I don't know, do you know Boomy? It's really interesting. It's an app where you can create your own AI-generated music, and then you can actually earn from it. So you can put it on Spotify, and you can earn from AI-generated music. You don't even have to be a musician anymore. Or maybe it's just another kind of redefinition of what a musician is, right? So they have created, users estimated 7 million songs, around 7% of the world's record music. And that's just now. I mean, imagine if this, when we get better at this, what role would the musician have? And we already see on Spotify something called Spotify Core. I guess it has different names, right? But Spotify Core is sort of the sound of Spotify. If you want to be on these lists, you have to have a special sound. So I have a friend who makes music. So before he puts it on Spotify, he has another person sort of search engine optimizing it, like we do with SEO, but he just does it on music. So it fits the playlists. And you know what? It works. So he gets many more listenings on his SEO-optimized music, sort of AI-optimized music from the algorithms that Spotify is pushing. That's an interesting move, right? How will that push the sort of development of music and the creativity as well? So a really important point that here before the last 2 minutes that I have is that the metaverse is an evolution and not a revolution. It's all about the direction that it's taking, and it's really important. So all these technologies that we see now are only pointing towards a direction. It's pointing towards something that's really interesting to see. So of course you have to be aware of how this will affect your businesses. We did some scenarios, as I said before. You can download them for free, where we look into these uncertainties on, how will the metaverse look? What kind of metaverses will we see? Will we have an open metaverse, like a free metaverse, or nerdverse, or betaverses disunited, around there? Will it be open? Will it be proprietary? Will it be convergent, or will it be separate? So these are some of the things that we dive into. I think we have, as an industry in general, especially us, the older generation, which is kind of weird to say, right? But the young understand this much more. We need meta-literacy. We need to understand some of these things better. We need to understand the way that we can actually work with this, what uncertainties there are, how to safeguard it, how to make sure that all the employees understand it, how the users understand it. In general, we need to work much more on this. And then, of course, in the end, which is always interesting. So in these new directions that it's taking, does your business actually have the right to win? You know, is there, just because you come from a huge legacy company, you know, we have seen huge legacy companies not making it before, Blockbuster obviously being our favorite example. But I really, really think that the whole Masori quote that I had before of leaning into the changes is something that we would love to, you know, help you on looking into, but also just making sure that you understand that it's really important in order for the company to be alive in 10 years as well. Thank you. Questions?
I've got one. So obviously it's very disruptive for the whole industry. In terms of control, do you think it's going to be disruption that's going to consolidate things with the way the industry is, you know, the current people kind of maybe hold market share, or is it going to be something maybe more akin to MySpace that kind of open things up for younger bands, both in terms of popularity and remuneration and making money?
So those are some of the uncertainties that we look into in the scenario. So obviously there could be two ways depending on how. Obviously the legacy company is also taking it, and I'm like, if the legacy companies are thinking the way that Masori is and trying to lean into this, then there might be some kind of mix there, but they might be still be in control, right? So they might be, so it will still be sort of closed in that sense and proprietary, and the same old, you know, players, the same sort of big tech. Like. Yeah, it's what it sounds like, but there's also a lot of, going back to the dystopian, utopian thing, there's also obviously a lot of people trying to work for this free metaverse and trying to see, could we actually with blockchain and with all these new things that are coming in, with the creator economy, with the whole new power sort of structure being sort of changing, will that work? And there's a lot of different factors going into that, but they're equally plausible, I would say, depending on how, you know, also we see a lot of interesting things coming from, you know, the empowerment of people right now. And this whole idea of wanting to take back control of your own data, not wanting to being put into this whole sort of algorithmic system, but trying to control it more yourself. But is it just a fad? It's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see, but also interesting to be open towards the possibilities and the possible futures.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
Sorry for not having the answer. I would love to have the answer on that.
The goal is to exchange, so yes, perhaps the second one?
Yeah, hi. When you can see that you know, AI can generate music at an incredible pace, how do you think that's going to affect musicians?
I think it's going to affect musicians the same way it's going to affect other industries, that we have to figure out a way to, you know, engage into this and see it as tools and see it as ways to helping us, or you as musicians. I don't know if how many musicians are here just working with music, but musicians using it as tools, because not moving into this development might leave you out of some kind of loop. But I also see that every time we see a trend, we see a counter trend. So, you know, going back to, you know, the all analog, non-algorithmic, you know, music is also going to be a huge thing, most likely, right? But it is definitely going to affect, because suddenly everybody can make new music in new ways. And we saw that with all new tools that came for musicians, right? Suddenly you didn't have to play a guitar anymore. You could use a synthesizer or, you know, do stuff on your computer. So all this is just going to evolve in a quite, I would say, big haste as the way that we see it right now. So it will definitely. So look into the different tools that there are and see if it can make you create new kind of music and do new sort of exploratory ways of creating music and engaging the fans and co-creation. I think there are a lot of new interesting things to be aware of. Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of investment, especially in the US and the traditional tech companies. What's your perspective on, let's say, the European footprint and also what's happening in Asia on the Metaverse?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we're seeing different ways, right? We're seeing different ways of going into this and moving into these kind of... hopefully, I had a hope when Meta... when Meta was, she's doing a panel, so go, no, yeah, I'm doing a panel too, so stay here, yeah. No, when Meta announced that they were going to hire 10,000 people in Europe, right, to do the Metaverse, I was like, yay, finally, they realized, you know, regulation is actually good, you know, we can actually, you know, maybe move this into the right direction, until I heard that, nah, it's just because we have, the, you know, the broadest representation of culture. So I hope, I would love to, we have at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, where we work for, better futures, we have this idea of the Nordic way, like some of the values that we have in the Nordics. Could that be pushed into the metaverse? Those principles, those values, the safety net we have, some of these things, the way that we want to protect people and make sure that this is not just being a replication of what Web 2 has been doing.
Yeah.
But I really, I don't know. There seems to be an interest, and there is going to be a lot of regulation with the DSA, with the DMA, with the AI Act and the Data Act, all new acts coming from the EU that are going to affect all the work in this field in about a year or two. So pay attention to regulation, obviously, if you're a European-centered company. But I guess that also, you can also see it in the regulation in the US now that they're trying to look into, right? And then you have, of course, the big Asian companies, and we can see with TikTok, they're good at it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. What a speaker. Really, wow.
Thank you.